The Worldview of Paul Cezanne, a Psychic Interpretation by Jane Roberts. Introduction by Seth, read by Martin John. Entry 2, December 12, 1975. The artist's purpose is to watch the world and study it, to wait and strike, capturing not the moment but the next instant of its creation or motion, to anticipate God, as it were, by collecting all those nuances of light and predicting their future positions. The artist's purpose is to read the mind of God or nature, or second-guess it, by setting the balances of rest into anticipated motion, suggesting, for example, the changing shape of the leaf before it actually moves, in brushstrokes that enclose the shape and yet free it. Strokes at one time clear, sure, and yet dappled. For this, the greatest mental agility, sensual acuteness, and intensity are required. For the senses must be tuned to the slightest variations so as to anticipate any changes in the air as animals do, while the mind must wait with mental breath held, dismissing all stray thoughts that might divert the senses' intentness. The brushstrokes then are natural, instinctive, sensual as paw prints. As the brush follows its path across the canvas in response to messages alive in the surroundings. Each stroke is an act of creation, and all of them taken together form the final painting, each stroke working with and yet against the other. To my way of thinking, it is futile to attempt to recreate nature. God can always do it better. But even He cannot create the personal vision of nature that is the artist's, and by translating that personal vision, the artist creates from God's nature a nature that is new. Only the anticipated motion can offset the static quality of the canvas itself. Only the timed yet fast brushstrokes can bring about new creation in which the next moment appears without actually appearing, and thereby turns the viewer's mind onward to events that may or may not occur. The colors themselves must bear the responsibility for depicting mass, building up contour, shape, and form, while still escaping such categories. Blending while not blending, the values cleverly playing with and against each other so that while anticipated motion is implied, the objects in the painting are given a solid enough past from which they will seem to be emerging. Long strokes take time. Short strokes, however, suggest the suddenness of nature. Left alone, the artist's hands will vary their pressure so that sometimes more pressure rests on one part of the brush than another, and the wise artist will become alert to his own behavior in such matters. Often the fingers are surer than the eye, and the brush will follow motion sensed truly, automatically expressing and registering it in a series of quick strokes that seem to the artist to come from nowhere. In such instances, pressure on the brush will vary, not erratically, but in such a way that the natural motions of the earth are suggested, so that, for example, a grass stroke almost seems to be living grass. Yet on inspection, it is a literal expression in terms of shape, but grass as it would be if it grew up from the canvas. Grass springing up from the paint, born from layered ground transparencies beneath. So the canvas itself and its qualities can be used in the same way that God or nature uses the ground of the earth, the brushstrokes rising up from it in layers so that there are hidden valleys and hills, apparent but not apparent, from which surface tones are built. Entry 2 continued. Ordinary perspective can suggest the past and the present so that a subject can appear to be above or below, close or distant, and hence perspective delineates the subject's position in space and time. The foreground of a painting, as it is usually handled, pertains to the present, so that the background by necessity implies the past. There is no place within a painting for the future when perspective is so used. There must be a projected foreground, since one cannot be manufactured. This projected foreground must be built up within the elements of usual perspective, appearing to rise from the foreground and background as well. This is done by brushstrokes that imply the anticipated motions of the future from the past, background, into the present, foreground, and by horizontal anticipations of motion that appear to come forward, out of the painting itself. Thus, by implication, the artist extends perspective ranges, using the space outside of the actual painting to suggest an object's position in the future. The eye level of the viewer is also important, and the height at which the painting is hung, for clever positioning will enhance such effects. These effects must not be obvious, however, for then they become like cheap tricks, sensual fakery. Great subtlety must be used. The painting itself must seem to grow out of the canvas. No color should be introduced in the overpainting which has not already appeared in the layers beneath, though their values may vary. These values being used, craftily again, to enhance the elements of perspective. Ordinary perspective is to be kept in mind but not slavishly followed, for breakages in it bring about surprises and suggest mysterious motion, sometimes attributing secret action to objects that the viewer knows well will not or should not move. Broken perspective, expertly executed and sparingly, suggest also those incongruencies present in nature. The sudden strong breeze across still waters, the crack in the perfect vase, the unpredictable informalities within nature's formal scheme. Yet the eye must predict, so the implied motions cannot appear to be random, as this would threaten the painting's integrity as an overall structure, and too much motion is as bad as too little. Then colors, instead of implying both solidarity and transparency, run away to blur images beyond recognition. The action becomes too fast, so that objects are distorted and any kind of rest or positioning is lost. Perspective is effective only when it is used in such a way that it transcends itself, and to this end the artist must use all of the other tools of his craft. The canvas itself is an object existing in space, and as such, it may continue to exist when the artist is gone. For this reason, if no other, the anticipated next motion is important. Such a painting 200 years hence will suggest the future to the viewer, so that the painting is not enclosed in the artist's past. This allows the viewer to participate and begs him to complete the painting's action, both mentally and sensuously. The painting must also suggest the continuation of itself beyond the frame in an imaginary perspective that appears because of the artist's wise use of the dimensions of the frame itself. A frame, then, should have the apparent purpose of keeping the painting from growing. The unpainted hills, for example, never appearing, say, in the foreground, must be implied and kept in mind. The objects in a still life or landscape are not only the ones to be taken into consideration, then, though they are, of course, the ones the artist concentrates upon, and represent the main visual elements of the painting. But if possible, the boundaries of a painting should contain suggestions of continuing objects or motion, so that the highlighted objects exist also in relationship to what does not show. Thus, the significance of objects rises as they are molded not only in reference to other obvious ones, but to those that are implied, present, say, but relatively invisible. Association is a handy technique in some such instances, where, for example, a fork can imply a table that is not clearly delineated, or a child's toy suggests the child who never appears. A fallen object begs for someone to pick it up and implies new motion. A cupboard that is shown ajar is more attractive and evocative than one open or closed, for surely someone will come to open or close it. Hence again, implied motion. Unrecognizable faces or figures in a background are intriguing for the same reason. The viewer may see in them the image of a friend or loved one. He will squint to see, wonder, and he is then sensuously aroused and again invited to participate. Figures in the foreground, however, are something different, for the viewer expects recognizable features. Looking at them, however, he often loses sight of their significance, thinking, people are people, but they are also objects, speckled with light, the forehead as mobile as a skyscape. Yet that mobility of mind is less easily captured by the flesh, for the flesh does not ripple in the wind as the sky seems to do. People forget that they are objects, moving or unmoving, and I try to imply an off-balance element as if to say, this object, while still an object like any other in a still life, thinks and dreams. But the thinking and dreaming is significant only because people are also objects. If they were not, there would be nothing so extraordinary about their abilities. but they share shape and size and position, mass, and so forth with all other objects. So by showing people as objects first, their significance is delineated by implication. It is as if I showed real eyes staring out from a jar. So portraits should not be perfectly executed, but off-centered in clever fashions that suggest motion also. In this case, contained motion, as if the body is keeping in some strange suffering that would otherwise escape, and the body must be shown in its environment in the same way described for objects. And that is the end of entry 2. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.